The heavy koa wood of my front door shook under the weight of fists pounding from the other side. Through the frosted glass, red and blue lights fractured into sharp streaks, flashing against the walls of my Honolulu living room. Outside, deep voices demanded I open up, claiming authority, claiming the law. But my thumb remained firmly pressed against the small black panic button hidden under my entryway console. I watched the security camera feed on my phone. The men wearing police uniforms lacked the standard municipal crest on their badges, and their posture screamed hired muscle, not sworn officers. They were here to take an 8-year-old girl, and they were sent by my own sister. My name is Rose Howell, and I am 34 years old. I work as a financial auditor for a luxury resort chain. I spend my days analyzing ledgers, detecting discrepancies, and trusting hard data over fragile emotions. But no spreadsheet could have prepared me for the financial crime my family dragged me into. 72 hours before those fake cops showed up to break down my door, my younger sister Brittany stood on my porch, smelling of expensive coconut sunscreen, and practiced deceit. She dropped off her boyfriend's 8-year-old daughter Mia for what she claimed was a simple babysitting favor while they flew to Paris. As Brittany turned to leave, she grabbed my arm. Her acrylic nails dug into my skin. She smiled, a tight, calculating smile, and whispered, "Do me a favor, and do not get attached to the kid. When Kevin and I get back, she is going to live with some distant relatives on the mainland. She will not be my responsibility anymore." She walked away without looking back. I stood there stunned by the sheer callousness of it, watching their rented SUV speed off down the palm-lined street. I turned to little Mia, expecting her to cry. Instead, she looked up at me with cold, sharp terror gripped the fabric of my shirt and whispered a secret that made the warm Hawaiian breeze turn to ice. "Aunt Rose," she said, "they did not pack my clothes. They packed his mistakes." Welcome back to Zara Told Stories, where quiet women finally say the things families do not want to hear. If you have ever been the reliable one, forced to clean up someone else's toxic mess, you will want to hear how this ends. Before I reveal what was hiding inside that little girl's backpack, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from today. Let me take you back to the beginning of that Friday afternoon. The trade winds were blowing a warm, salty breeze off the Pacific, rustling the broad monstera leaves in my front yard. I had just finished brewing a pot of Kona coffee when my doorbell rang. Brittany stood on my welcome mat, wearing a pristine white linen sundress. My sister is 29, and she treats life like a prolonged audition for a reality show. She expects the world to furnish her lifestyle, and when it falls short, she expects me to cover the deficit. I know her finances better than she does. I have bailed her out of overdraft fees, paid her overdue electric bills, and quietly covered her rent more times than I care to count. But as she reached out to hug me, my eyes locked onto her left wrist. A brand-new rose gold watch encrusted with pave diamonds caught the harsh tropical sunlight, throwing brilliant little prisms across my stucco wall. That timepiece represented a 5-figure expenditure. It was a glaring anomaly, a red line on a balance sheet that made 0 sense for a woman who had asked to borrow $50 for groceries just 2 weeks prior. "We are catching a red-eye to Paris tonight," Brittany announced, adjusting her oversized designer sunglasses. The gold bangles on her wrist clinked together a hollow metallic sound. "A spontaneous European getaway," Kevin surprised me. Kevin stood a few paces back on the walkway. He had been dating Brittany for 8 months. He shifted his weight from one boat shoe to the other, perpetually checking his phone. Sweat beaded at his temples despite the shade of my porch awning. He did not look like a man embarking on a romantic vacation. He looked like a man waiting for a getaway car. His jaw was clenched tight, and he kept glancing up and down my quiet residential street as if expecting someone to follow them. Beside him stood Mia, She clutched the straps of a heavy-looking pink floral backpack, her gaze drilled into the welcome mat. She wore a faded yellow t-shirt and denim shorts, a stark contrast to her father's tailored resort wear and Brittany's designer labels. Brittany pushed past me into the entryway, bringing a cloud of heavy perfume into my house. "We just need you to watch Mia for a week, maybe 2. Kevin's ex-wife's family usually takes her, but they are being difficult. You know how it is." "You never use your guest room anyway, Rose." She did not ask. She informed. That was the established dynamic of our relationship. I was the responsible older sister, the shock absorber for her endless drama. I looked at Kevin, waiting for him to offer some sort of parental instruction, a list of allergies, an emergency contact number. He offered nothing. He just tapped his phone screen, his thumb moving in rapid, anxious swipes. "I need to use your restroom before we head to the airport," Brittany declared, marching down the hall without waiting for an answer. I was left standing in the foyer with Kevin and Mia. I knelt down to Mia's level, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "Hi, Mia. We are going to have fun this week. Do you like the beach? We can go collect sea glass tomorrow morning." Mia did not blink. She just pulled her pink backpack tighter against her chest, her knuckles turning white from the strain. Kevin finally looked up from his phone, exhaling a sharp breath. "She is shy," Kevin said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "Just keep her inside. She burns easily." Brittany emerged from the hallway, smacking her lips together as she reapplied gloss. "All right, babe, wheels up. The car is waiting at the curb." That was when she pulled me aside. I could feel the cold metal of her new watch pressing against my forearm as her nails dug in. She delivered that sickening line about not getting attached, stating Mia would not be her responsibility upon their return. The casual cruelty of it stole the air right out of my lungs. She spoke about a human child the way one might speak about a piece of luggage past its return date. Before I could form a response, Brittany pivoted on her heel. Kevin did not even stoop down to offer his daughter a goodbye hug. They walked briskly to a sleek black town car idling at the curb. The door slammed shut, and the engine roared as they accelerated away, disappearing around the corner of my street. The silence they left behind felt suffocating. The Hawaiian sun beat down on the pavement, but a distinct chill washed over the back of my neck. I turned to Mia, who was still standing exactly where they had left her. She had not spoken a single syllable since she arrived. "Let us get you settled inside," I said gently, reaching out to take her heavy backpack. I figured it was stuffed with pajamas, a favorite blanket, maybe some coloring books. Mia stepped back, refusing to hand the bag over. She looked up at me, and her eyes held a chilling clarity. It was not the standard sadness of a child left behind by her father. It was the sharp, hypervigilant look of a witness who knows too much. She reached out, curling her small fingers into the fabric of my work blouse, and pulled me down until I was inches from her face. I could hear her ragged breathing over the distant sound of ocean waves crashing against the shoreline. "Aunt Rose," she whispered, her voice trembling but terribly clear. "They did not pack my clothes. They packed his mistakes." I guided Mia away from the harsh afternoon glare and into the cool shade of my living room. The heavy koa wood door clicked shut, sealing out the rhythmic sound of the ocean and the hum of the neighborhood. I slid the deadbolt into place. It was a habit, a small mechanical action, but right then, it felt like building a fortress. My living room is a sanctuary of order, neutral tones, organized shelves, everything clean and predictable. The chaos of my sister rarely breached this space. I knelt on the woven area rug, eye level with the child who was still clutching her bag like a shield. "Let us see what we are dealing with," I said softly. I reached out, and this time her grip loosened. The canvas material felt unusually rigid against my palms. It was far too heavy for a weekend supply of summer clothes. The zipper yielded with a sharp metallic hiss. I pulled the fabric back, expecting the bright colors of cotton dresses, a favorite stuffed animal, or the plastic sheen of a doll. Instead, the sterile scent of printer ink and stale coffee wafted out. The main compartment held zero clothing. It was crammed edge to edge with thick manila folders. A black leather-bound ledger sat wedged against the back panel. Nestled in the front pocket was a cheap plastic prepaid cell phone, the kind you buy at a gas station with cash and throw away when the deed is done. I rocked back on my heels. My training at the resort chain kicked in. My days are spent tracing missing inventory, flagged accounts, and forged vendor invoices. I know what hidden ledgers look like. I know what people try to bury. I looked at the little girl standing in my pristine living room. "You packed this, Mia?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level. She shook her head, her dark pigtails swaying. Her eyes darted toward the window as if expecting her father's SUV to reverse up the driveway. "I did not pack it," she whispered. "I took it. I took it from his black briefcase in the study." My heart performed a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. "You stole this from your dad? Why?" She wrapped her arms around her own waist, making herself smaller. "Because I heard him yelling on the phone last night. He was shouting at a man. He said they had to sell my mom's house on Maui right now, before the lawyers looked too close. He said he was going to lose everything if they did not hurry." Her mom's house. I knew the property she meant. Kevin was a widower. His late wife had inherited a sprawling oceanfront estate on the Valley Isle, a legacy property held in a secure trust for Mia until she reached adulthood. Kevin was merely the custodian, the caretaker, of a fortune that did not belong to him. I took the folders by their edges, treating them like a crime scene, and spread them across my glass coffee table. The afternoon sun slanted through the wooden blinds, illuminating rows of numerical data. The first folder contained bank statements from a regional Hawaiian credit union. The second held property deeds, tax assessments, and trust addendums. I opened the black ledger. It was a handwritten map of deceit. My eyes scanned the columns. Money was bleeding out of the trust account in calculated, systematic increments. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. The amounts were tailored to stay just under the threshold that triggers a federal banking alert. The destination for every transfer was a newly formed, limited liability company registered to a post office box in the Cayman Islands, a classic shell entity. The picture assembled itself with chilling clarity. Kevin was not managing his daughter's inheritance. He was liquidating it. He was draining a generational asset to feed something else, bad investments, hidden debts, or simply unparalleled greed. He was funneling the wealth of an 8-year-old girl into an offshore vacuum. And my sister, with her brand-new diamond watch and sudden taste for European vacations, was standing right beside him, holding the funnel. But the betrayal cut deeper than stolen money. I sifted through the final folder, my fingertips brushing against a stack of thick, stapled pages. The header read, "Commercial Bridge Loan Application." I read the terms. It was a high-interest, short-term loan secured against the equity of the Maui estate. The principal amount was staggering. But it was the signature page that made the breath stall in my throat. There, on the line designated for the financial guarantor, was my name. Rosemarie Howell, written in bold blue ink. It was an excellent forgery. The loops of the R's and the sharp incline of the L's closely mimicked my own handwriting. Below my signature was my social security number, my current residential address, and the corporate phone number of the luxury resort where I work. I stared at the blue ink until the letters blurred. A cold prickling across my scalp, traveling down my spine. This was not just a negligent father stealing from his child. This was a sophisticated snare, and I was the bait. To secure a loan of this magnitude against a property held in trust, the bank required a guarantor with impeccable credit and verifiable steady income. Kevin did not have that. Brittany certainly did not have that. But I did. My credit score is flawless. My employment history is a straight, unbroken line of reliability. They had used my financial identity as the collateral for their theft. If Kevin defaulted on this bridge loan and transferring the funds to a Cayman shell company guaranteed an intentional default, the bank would not go after a dead woman's trust. They would come after the guarantor. They would come after me. I would face federal wire fraud charges. I would lose my CPA license, my career, my home, and my freedom. I slowly lowered the paper back onto the glass table. The quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen suddenly sounded deafening. I looked at Mia. She was watching my face, reading the shift in my expression with the survival instinct of a child who has grown up walking on eggshells. "Are you mad at me?" she asked, her voice cracking. I reached out and smoothed a stray lock of hair away from her forehead. My hands were remarkably steady, a trait I inherited from navigating my sister's manufactured crises for 2 decades. "No, sweet girl," I said softly. "I am not mad at you. You did a very brave thing. You might have just saved both of our lives." I sat back on the rug, surrounded by the paper trail of my own framing. The babysitting favor was a decoy. Brittany and Kevin dropping Mia at my house was a tactical maneuver. They needed me distracted. They needed me occupied with packing lunches and planning beach trips while the final wire transfers cleared and the Maui estate was sold out from under us. They calculated that the reliable, compliant older sister would never pry into a child's backpack. They expected me to remain blind until the federal investigators knocked on my door. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot what I do for a living. You do not hand a ledger of financial crimes to an auditor and expect her not to read the bottom line. The cheap, prepaid cell phone sat on the edge of the coffee table, a dark plastic rectangle mocking the silence of the room. It was the only item in the bag I had not yet examined. A burner phone implied a separate stream of communication, a channel hidden from standard billing records. Why would a man flying to Paris need an untraceable phone tucked into his daughter's belongings? Unless he was not flying to Paris at all. A terrible suspicion began to take root in my mind, weaving through the evidence laid out before me. The diamond watch, the sudden departure, the forged documents requiring imminent processing. I looked at the flight confirmation number Brittany had casually texted me that morning, an ostentatious display of her itinerary meant to evoke my envy. I needed to verify that flight, and I needed to do it before the sun went down. I left the cheap prepaid phone resting on the glass coffee table and walked over to my desk. I opened my laptop. The screen illuminated my face with a harsh blue glare casting long shadows against the walls of my living room. I needed to verify their itinerary. I needed hard data. Brittany possesses a fatal flaw that makes her a terrible criminal. She is entirely addicted to an audience. She cannot resist documenting every second of her fabricated reality. I navigated to her public social media profile. There it was, posted just 4 hours ago. A perfectly filtered photograph of 2 first-class boarding passes to Charles de Gaulle Airport, resting next to a flute of expensive airport lounge champagne. She had strategically blurred out their last names, but in her vanity, she forgot to blur the 6-digit alphanumeric confirmation code printed in the upper right corner. I opened a new browser tab and went directly to the airline website. My fingers flew across the keyboard, entering her last name and the reservation code. I clicked search. The page loaded for a fraction of a second before flashing a bright red banner across the top of my screen. The text read, "Reservation canceled." I leaned closer to the monitor. The system detailed the timeline. The tickets had been purchased 3 days ago and canceled this afternoon, exactly 2 hours before they dropped Mia off at my house. They received a full refund to the original credit card. They were never going to Europe. The entire dramatic departure, the designer luggage, the tearful fake goodbyes, it was all a meticulously choreographed performance. But if they did not leave the island, where were they? Brittany has always treated my life like a free subscription service. She uses my streaming accounts, my bulk store memberships, and my rideshare profile. She is a parasite disguised as a socialite. I logged into my rideshare history, clicking on the recent activity tab. A premium luxury black car had been ordered 2 hours ago. The pickup location was the International Airport departures curb. The drop-off location was a gated, private beachfront estate in Haleiwa, located on the remote north shore of Oahu. They had driven to the airport, canceled their flights, ordered a private car, and traveled an hour north to lock themselves behind a gate. The sheer audacity of the lie settled heavy in my chest. I turned my chair around and looked at Mia. The 8-year-old girl was sitting on my sofa, her knees pulled up to her chin, watching a cartoon I had put on the television, with blank, unblinking eyes. Why abandon your only child if you did not even leave the island? If Kevin and Brittany were simply taking a local staycation, they could have easily brought her along. Taking Mia would have maintained the illusion of normalcy. Dumping her at my house with a fake European itinerary required effort. It required a calculated risk. They needed Mia out of their immediate vicinity, but they also needed her placed in a very specific location. They needed her with me. I abandoned the laptop and went back to the pink backpack on the floor. I pulled out the thickest manila folder, the one containing the property deeds and trust addendums for the Maui estate. An auditor does not read a legal document from top to bottom like a novel. We scan for anomalies. We look for dates, authorization clauses, and transfer conditions. I spread the crisp white pages across the woven rug, tracing the lines of dense legal text with my index finger. I found the original trust agreement established by Mia's late mother. Then I found the recent addendums drafted by a private Honolulu law firm. I flipped to the pending sale contract. The Maui oceanfront estate was currently in escrow. The buyer was listed as a limited liability company, the same offshore shell entity I had seen in the Black Ledger. The purchase price was listed at $6.5 million. I scanned the escrow timeline. The closing date was bolded at the bottom of page 4. The transaction was scheduled to finalize on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. I checked the clock on my wall. It was Friday evening. I was staring at a 48-hour ticking clock. The sale of a property held in a minor's trust is notoriously difficult to execute. The laws in Hawaii are designed to protect children from exactly this type of predatory liquidation. I read the stipulations required to release the funds. Kevin was listed on the trust as a custodian, but the document contained a rigid safeguard. To liquidate a hard asset exceeding $1 million, the title company required the physical, notarized signature of the child's legal guardian, asserting that the sale was strictly in the best financial interest of the minor. I dug deeper into Kevin's personal files within the bag. I pulled out a background check report he had run on himself. He had a prior felony conviction from his early 20s involving petty theft and check fraud. Under the specific bylaws of this trust, a convicted felon could not serve as the sole authorizing guardian for a minor's real estate liquidation. The title company would flag it immediately. The bank would freeze the transfer. Kevin needed a clean proxy to authorize the sale. He needed someone with an immaculate financial record, a pristine background check, and a verifiable professional reputation. He needed me. My hands began to feel cold. I frantically sorted through the remaining loose papers until I found a document stamped by the Family Court of Hawaii. It was a petition for temporary emergency guardianship. The filing date was yesterday. The paperwork stated that Kevin was seeking urgent out-of-state medical treatment and was voluntarily transferring full legal and physical custody of his daughter Mia to her aunt. The document designated Rosemary Howell as the sole temporary guardian. It was a complete fabrication. But at the bottom of the page, sitting stark against the white paper, was my signature. The same flawless blue ink, the same perfect loops and sharp angles I used to sign my own tax returns. The trap snapped shut around me. The architecture of their scheme was terrifyingly brilliant. By Monday morning, the title company would demand the guardian's signature to finalize the sale and release the $6.5 million into the Cayman Islands account. Kevin and Brittany were hiding on the North Shore, waiting for the escrow to close. They had forged the temporary guardianship papers to bypass Kevin's felony restriction. And they had forged the loan applications to leverage the property value before the sale even finalized. They did not just leave a child on my porch. They constructed a multi-million-dollar heist and placed me squarely in the center of the blast radius. When the federal investigators inevitably realized the trust had been emptied and the money laundered offshore, they would look for the person who authorized the transfer. They would look at the official court records. They would see my name. They would see my signature. They would see that I had physical custody of the child while the crime was committed. I was the fall guy. The perfect, reliable, clean-record sister left holding the bag while they vanished with the money. The air in my living room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I stood up, my pulse hammering against my throat. I looked at the forged signatures again. The precision of the forgery suggested someone who had studied my handwriting for years. Someone who had access to my old checks, my lease agreements, my personal files. Brittany. My own sister had traced my signature, effectively signing away my freedom so she could buy designer watches and disappear. I walked into the kitchen and gripped the edge of the granite counter until my knuckles turned white. I could not fight a federal wire fraud conspiracy alone. I needed backup. I needed someone who could reel Brittany in, someone who held authority over her. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the only person who had ever been able to control my sister's chaotic life. I pressed the call button and waited for my mother to answer, hoping she could help me dismantle the bomb ticking in my living room. I pressed the call button and held the phone against my ear. The line rang 3 times. With each long tone, I stared at the forged blue ink bearing my name on the granite countertop. Finally, my mother answered. Patricia sounded remarkably relaxed. The clinking of wine glasses and muted television chatter echoed in the background of her suburban living room. She was likely hosting her weekly bridge club, entirely oblivious to the federal crime unfolding under her name. Or so I thought. "Mom, I need you to listen to me carefully," I began, keeping my voice low so Mia would not hear from the living room. Brittany and Kevin did not go to Europe. They are hiding on the North Shore. Kevin forged my signature on court documents to steal Mia's trust fund. A heavy silence stretched across the line. I expected a sharp gasp. I expected maternal outrage, the protective instinct of a mother discovering her eldest daughter was being framed for a massive financial felony. Instead, Patricia released a long, exasperated sigh. It was a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Honestly, Rose, you are always so dramatic," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Why are you snooping through their personal belongings? They asked you for one simple favor. Can you not just be the reliable sister for once, without making a massive production out of it?" I gripped the edge of the granite counter so hard my knuckles ached. "Mom, this is not a production. It is a multi-million-dollar heist. There is a 48-hour deadline before a title company liquidates an 8-year-old girl's inheritance, and my name is on the authorization documents. If this escrow closes on Monday, I am looking at federal prison time." "Nobody is going to prison," Patricia snapped, her tone tightening into a sharp command. Brittany is going through a highly stressful life transition. Kevin has private investments. He knows exactly what he is doing. You simply lack the vision to understand high-level finance. He is a convicted felon, Mom. He is using my clean background check to bypass a legal restriction on the trust. Another pause. This time, the background noise on her end muted entirely. She had walked into another room and closed a door. When she spoke again, the mask of maternal ignorance slipped away, revealing something far more sinister underneath. "Rose," my mother said softly, her words measured and deliberate. "Kevin is going to send over some final escrow paperwork on Monday morning. A courier will drop it off at your office. I need you to sign it. Do not read the fine print. Do not audit the margins like you always do. Just sign the pages where the yellow tabs are located." The humid air in my kitchen turned to ice. "You know about this. You know they are stealing the money. I know that your sister finally found a man who can provide her with the lifestyle she deserves," Patricia countered, her voice completely devoid of any moral hesitation. "She has suffered enough disappointments. This is her fresh start. Just sign the papers, Rose. Keep the peace. You have your secure corporate job and your sensible apartment. You will be fine. You always figure things out. Do this for your sister." The phrase hung in the space between us. Do this for your sister. Those 5 words acted as a heavy iron key, unlocking a vault in my memory I had spent 2 decades trying to weld shut. Suddenly, I was not standing in my adult Honolulu kitchen. I was 12 years old, standing on the faded linoleum of my childhood home. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Our neighbor, Mrs. Gable, had come over weeping because her vintage pearl necklace was missing from her bedroom vanity. I had been sitting at our dining table, finishing my algebra homework. Brittany, who was 7 at the time, was hiding behind our mother's legs. I can still clearly see the rigid set of Patricia's shoulders as she marched into our shared bedroom and found the stolen pearls shoved roughly inside Brittany's wooden toy box. My mother did not march Brittany back next door to apologize. She did not teach her youngest child about theft or accountability. Instead, Patricia gripped my upper arm, her fingernails biting deep into my skin, and dragged me into the hallway. "Your sister is too fragile for this." Patricia had hissed her breath, smelling of stale coffee and mints. "Mrs. Gable will call the police. Brittany is just a baby. She does not understand consequences. But you are strong, Rose. You are the resilient one. Go over there and tell that woman you took the necklace. Tell her you were jealous." "But I did not take it," I had pleaded, hot tears burning my eyes. "Keep the peace, Rose," my mother commanded her, eyes narrowing into cold, unforgiving slits. "Or I promise you, I will make your life miserable." I took the fall. I walked next door, handed over the pearls, and let a grown woman call me a thief to my face. I lost my neighborhood babysitting jobs. I lost the trust of the community. Brittany got a large bowl of ice cream that evening for surviving the trauma of a stressful day. That single afternoon laid the foundation for the exact dynamic we were enacting right now. Brittany was allowed to consume everything in her path, and I was expected to gladly throw myself under the tires of her mistakes to cushion the impact. The memory faded, snapping me back to the cold reality of the phone call. My mother was not a victim of Brittany's deception. Patricia was the primary architect of my sister's impunity. She was entirely willing to let me face federal wire fraud charges just so her favorite daughter could maintain a manufactured illusion of wealth. "I am not taking the fall for a felony, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a low register I had never used with her before. It was the tone I reserved for hostile corporate audits, stripped of all daughterly deference. "If you ruin this for her, Rose, you are dead to me." Patricia spat the venom, finally breaking through her composed veneer. "I will tell everyone you are unstable. I will tell the police you stole those documents out of spite because you have always been violently jealous of Brittany's happiness. You are going to sign that paper." I did not argue. Arguing with my mother is like pouring water into a black hole. It consumes all your energy and yields absolutely nothing in return. I ended the call, pulling the phone away from my ear and setting it face down on the granite island. The silence in my house was absolute. Outside, the broad palm fronds scraped against the roof tiles, pushed by the evening winds. I looked around my carefully curated life. The comfortable furniture, the clean lines, the security I had built brick by brick with my own two hands. My family was not my safety net. They were a hunting party, and I was the prey they had cornered. They believed they had me trapped because for 34 years I had always yielded to their demands. I had always chosen compliance over confrontation. I walked back into the living room. Mia had fallen asleep on the sofa, her small chest rising and falling in a rhythmic, exhausted cadence. She was an 8-year-old pawn in a high-stakes game abandoned by the very people assigned to protect her. I pulled a woven throw blanket over her shoulders, tucking the edges tightly around her small frame. I promised myself right then that neither of us was going to be a casualty of their greed. I moved to my home office, carrying the heavy pink floral backpack with me. I turned on my desktop computer and booted up a heavy-duty commercial-grade document scanner I use for my remote accounting work. I did not shed a single tear. Panic is a luxury reserved for people who have someone to catch them when they fall. I had no one. Therefore, I could not afford to fall. I methodically removed every single page from the manila folders. I smoothed out the creases in the bank statements. I perfectly aligned the property deeds, the forged loan applications, and the fake emergency guardianship petition. I fed them into the scanner, one by one. The machine whirred and clicked a mechanical rhythm that grounded my racing thoughts. I created a secure, encrypted cloud directory. I set up a 2-factor authentication protocol that bypassed my personal cell phone entirely, linking the access codes to a secure physical token locked in my desk drawer. Every scanned image uploaded straight into the digital vault. I was transforming their physical paper trail into an indestructible digital weapon. If my family wanted to play a game of federal fraud, they were about to learn that an auditor never arrives at a battlefield without a backup ledger. The digital clock on my computer monitor shifted to 11:45 at night. I was just finishing the last batch of trust addendums when the quiet safety of my home was violently shattered. A heavy, aggressive pounding echoed from the front of the house. It was not the polite knock of a neighbor needing to borrow sugar. It was the commanding strike of a fist hitting solid wood, demanding immediate entry. I froze, the final forged signature page still gripped in my hand as the reality of my isolation crashed over me. They were not waiting for Monday morning to secure their loose ends. The threat had already arrived at my front door. The heavy wooden door vibrated in its frame. Each strike of the fist outside echoed through my quiet hallway like a gunshot. I stood in the doorway of my home office, the digital scanner humming softly behind me, and took a slow, measured breath. Panic is a useless emotion. It clouds judgment. It obscures data. I walked down the hall, my bare feet silent against the cool bamboo flooring. I did not turn on the porch light. I leaned close to the reinforced peephole. The man standing on my welcome mat was trying very hard to look dangerous. He wore a dark suit, but the fabric was stiff, the kind of cheap polyester blend that traps the humid island heat. He shifted his weight, his shoulders hunched, his jaw jutting forward in a practiced display of intimidation. He raised his fist to strike the wood again. I did not undo the deadbolt. I pressed the intercom button on my security panel. "Can I help you?" I asked. My voice carried through the external speaker, flat and unbothered. The man jolted, startled by the sudden voice. He recovered quickly, stepping closer to the camera lens. "My name is Andrew," he growled, attempting a low, gravelly pitch. "Kevin sent me. There was a mix-up with the luggage today. I am here to pick up the pink backpack. Hand it over, and we will not have any problems. I analyzed him the way I analyze a questionable expense report. People who pose a genuine physical threat do not announce their presence by hammering on a front door at midnight. They do not wear poorly fitted suits to a shakedown, and they certainly do not sweat this much. A bead of perspiration traced a path down his temple, catching the ambient light from the street lamp. He was terrified, attempting to mask his fear with a shallow layer of hostility. "The backpack contains personal belongings," I replied smoothly. "Kevin can pick it up himself tomorrow." Andrew slapped his open palm against the door. "Listen to me very carefully, lady," he sneered. "You are playing a game outside your pay grade. Kevin is a powerful guy. You do not want to cross his associates. I am not leaving this porch without that bag. Open the door now, or I will break a window and take it myself." He puffed out his chest, trying to look broad. That was his crucial mistake. The movement pulled his suit jacket taut, pressing the thin fabric against the contents of his breast pocket. My eyes locked onto the outline. It was a very distinct rectangular shape. Beneath it, clipping the edge of his shirt pocket, was a tiny, unmistakable smudge of black ink. My mind clicked the pieces together. The forged emergency guardianship petition required a notary seal to appear legitimate to a title company. Kevin needed a notary who was willing to stamp a legal document without verifying the physical identification of the signatory. He needed a rubber stamp, someone desperate for a quick payout. Andrew was not a mob enforcer. He was not a dangerous business associate. He was a compromised, underpaid notary public who had broken the law for a few $100s. Lying awake in the middle of the night, Andrew must have realized the enormous liability he had just incurred. He had stamped a document assigning custody of a child he had never seen to a woman he had never met. He was standing on my porch to destroy the evidence before his career went up in flames. I leaned closer to the intercom microphone. "You are not going to break a window, Andrew. You are going to listen to me very carefully. I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what is in your breast pocket. It is a self-inking notary stamp. You illegally notarized a fraudulent family court petition today." The blood drained from Andrew's face. His tough guy posture evaporated, instantly replaced by the trembling reality of a bureaucrat caught in a lie. He took a stumbling step backward, his eyes darting toward the empty street. "You think Kevin is a powerful guy?" I continued, my tone dropping to a quiet, icy precision. "Kevin is a convicted felon, attempting to liquidate a minor's trust fund through an offshore shell company. He used you. He had you stamp a forged signature to facilitate federal wire fraud. That pink backpack contains the original forged documents bearing your official seal." "Give me the bag," he pleaded. His voice cracked, shedding all pretense of menace. "Please." I did not know what he was doing. He just said it was a simple custody transfer. He gave me $500. "If you just give me the paperback, I can void the stamp in my logbook. Nobody has to know." "I am an auditor, Andrew. I do not void fraudulent transactions. I document them. And you are out of luck. The physical documents are already gone. They are locked inside a safety deposit box at my bank downtown. The digital copies have already been transmitted to a secure server. If you run right now, you might have time to hire a good defense attorney before the federal investigators trace your stamp." Andrew did not say another word. He turned and sprinted across my lawn, his cheap dress shoes slipping on the damp grass. He scrambled into a faded sedan parked halfway down the block, the engine grinding before roaring to life. He sped away, leaving black tire marks on the asphalt. The threat of physical violence vanished, replaced by the pathetic reality of a cowardly accomplice abandoning a sinking ship. I exhaled. The adrenaline slowly receded from my bloodstream, leaving a dull ache in my shoulders. I had neutralized Kevin's hired muscle with nothing but facts. The perimeter of my home was secure. I turned away from the door, intending to finish encrypting the final bank statements in my office. As I walked back through the living room, a soft, ragged sound broke the silence. It came from the sofa. Mia was shifting restlessly under the woven throw blanket. I approached quietly, hoping she was just caught in a bad dream. But as I drew near, the heat radiating from her small body hit me in a tangible wave. I knelt beside the couch and gently placed the back of my hand against her forehead. Her skin was burning hot. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks with sweat. She whimpered in her sleep, a small, fragile sound that pierced right through my analytical armor. This was not a simple chill. This was a severe spiking fever. The intense stress of the day, the sudden abandonment, the lingering fear it had, broken down her immune system entirely. I needed to get her to a doctor immediately. I reached for my phone to locate the nearest 24-hour urgent care clinic, but as I pulled up the map application, a cold realization settled over me. Far more chilling than the fake mobster on my porch. I was a ghost in the medical system. I had no legal rights to this child. The emergency guardianship paperwork sitting on my desk was a forgery, and even if I dared to present it to a triage nurse, it had not been officially filed with the family court. I had no medical consent forms, no insurance cards, no authorized proxy status. To an urgent care physician, I was just an unrelated adult holding a sick child. The hospital bureaucracy is a rigid, unforgiving machine built to protect biological parents. It protects them even when those parents orchestrate multi-million-dollar heists and hide on the North Shore. To get Mia the antibiotics she desperately needed, I was going to have to fight a system designed to shut me out, and I had exactly 36 hours left on the clock before the Maui estate was sold out from under her. Morning light filtered through the wooden blinds of my living room, painting pale golden stripes across the floorboards. Outside, the tropical birds began their dawn chorus, oblivious to the countdown ticking inside my walls. It was Saturday morning. I had roughly 48 hours until the escrow office opened on Monday, and the window to stop the sale of the Maui estate was rapidly shrinking. But my immediate crisis was not financial. It was medical. Mia laid on the sofa shivering despite the heavy woven blanket tucked around her chin. Her skin radiated a dry, alarming heat. The stress of her father abandoning her, combined with the midnight terror of the fake notary pounding on the door, had broken her small body down. Her cheeks were flushed a deep, unhealthy crimson. Her breath rattled in her chest, short and shallow. I scooped her up. She weighed very little, her arms wrapping loosely around my neck like a fragile vine. I carried her out to my sedan, strapping her into the back seat, and drove toward the nearest urgent care center. The streets of Honolulu were quiet, the tourists still sleeping off their Friday night luau's, but my pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my temples. The sliding glass doors of the clinic parted, welcoming us into a sterile, brightly lit waiting room, smelling of bleach and stale magazines. I approached the front desk, holding Mia upright against my hip. The receptionist, a woman with tired eyes and a tight bun, clicked her mouse and looked up. Patient name and date of birth, she requested, her tone flat and rehearsed. I provided the information. I am her aunt, I explained, keeping my voice steady. She spiked a high fever overnight. She needs to see a doctor, right now. The receptionist held out a manicured hand. I will need your photo identification, her insurance card, and the notarized medical consent form from her legal guardian. My stomach plummeted. I do not have the insurance card, I said, maintaining direct eye contact. Her father left the island yesterday. It is an emergency situation. I can pay out of pocket with my own credit card. The receptionist withdrew her hand, her posture stiffening into a wall of bureaucratic protocol. I cannot accept your credit card for a pediatric patient unless you have legal standing. State law is very strict regarding minors. Without a signed proxy form or a court order granting you temporary custody, no physician in this building can legally examine her. The urge to scream clawed at my throat. I had a forged guardianship document sitting on my desk at home, but handing over a fake court order to a medical professional would implicate me in Kevin's felony. I was trapped in a systemic blockade. The medical infrastructure is designed to protect biological parents, acting as a shield for families. Today, that same shield was being used to deny a desperately sick 8-year-old girl basic health care simply because her father was a criminal hiding on the North Shore. "Please," I urged, adjusting Mia's weight against my side. "She is burning up. Just check her temperature. I am sorry," the receptionist replied, turning her attention back to her monitor. "You need to contact her father and have him fax a consent waiver directly to our front desk. If it is a true emergency, I advise you to call an ambulance, but they will require the same paperwork at the emergency room." I carried Mia back out to the parking lot, the humid morning air clinging to my skin. I buckled her into the car, my mind racing through alternative solutions. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I had tried to avoid tipping my hand, but Mia's health superseded my strategic silence. I opened my messaging application and typed a text directly to Brittany. "Mia is running a dangerous fever. I am at the clinic. Call this number immediately and give them verbal medical consent." I pressed send. I watched the delivery notification appear. I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The silence from my sister was a tactical weapon. She was ignoring me, hoping to keep me paralyzed, hoping I would be too overwhelmed by childcare to notice the impending sale of the Maui property. Then my phone vibrated in my palm. It was not a reply from Brittany. It was a notification from a social media application. Then another arrived. And another. A cascade of alerts flooded my screen, overlapping in a rapid, chaotic sequence. I tapped the screen, opening the application. Brittany had just published a live video, broadcasting to our entire extended family and her hundreds of local followers. She sat on a white leather sofa, wearing oversized sunglasses, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue. "My sister Rose is refusing to return my calls," Brittany told the camera, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "Kevin and I are supposed to be enjoying our honeymoon phase, but Rose took my stepdaughter and will not let us speak to her. She is holding Mia hostage because she has always been jealous of my relationships. I am terrified for my little girl. Please pray for us." Beneath the video, a lengthy text post detailed my supposed history of mental instability. She painted a picture of a bitter, lonely auditor attempting to steal a child out of pure spite. The comments section was a digital firing squad. Aunt Janice wrote, "I always knew Rose had a dark streak. Return that child immediately." My cousin Paul added, "Involving an innocent kid in your jealousy issues is sick, Rose. We are calling the authorities." The notifications kept multiplying. My phone buzzed relentlessly, a physical manifestation of the hatred pouring in from people who shared my bloodline. Brittany had fired the first shot in a public arena. She was orchestrating a vicious smear campaign designed to isolate me, ruin my reputation, and discredit any claims I might make about the forged documents. By painting me as an unstable kidnapper, she was building an alibi. When the federal investigators eventually came asking questions, Brittany's digital footprint would show a frantic mother, not a calculated thief. A hot, furious energy surged through my veins. I wanted to type a response. I wanted to post a photograph of the canceled flight itinerary, the offshore shell company ledger, the fake notary stamp. I wanted to burn her pristine social media image to the ground for the entire island to witness. My thumbs hovered over the digital keyboard. Then I paused. I looked at the little girl sleeping feverishly in my rearview mirror. Engaging in a public screaming match is exactly what Brittany wanted. She thrived in chaos. She survived on drama. If I entered her arena, I would be playing by her rules. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the ocean breeze drifting through the cracked car window. I remembered the cardinal rule of auditing. Paper beats noise. Let them talk. Let them type their hateful comments. I reached toward the side of my phone and pressed the power button, holding it down until the screen faded to black. I severed the connection to their toxic outrage. I needed a solution for Mia that bypassed the systemic red tape, and I needed it instantly. I started the engine and drove away from the clinic, heading toward the upscale resort district of Waikiki. My career as a financial auditor for a luxury hospitality brand comes with distinct advantages. 2 years ago, I audited the commercial leases for the retail spaces on our resort properties. I discovered a significant billing error that had overcharged a private concierge medical practice by tens of thousands of dollars. I corrected the ledger and expedited their refund. The lead physician, Dr. Lin, had shaken my hand and promised to return the favor if I ever needed anything. I parked in the subterranean garage of the resort and carried Mia straight up the private elevator to Dr. Lin's immaculate suite. There were no bureaucratic receptionists blocking my path here. I walked into his office and placed the sleeping child on his examination table. Dr. Lin took one look at my face and asked no questions about proxy forms or legal guardianship. He retrieved his stethoscope and went to work. Within 20 minutes, he diagnosed a severe bacterial throat infection exacerbated by extreme stress. He provided a starter course of strong antibiotics straight from his private dispensary, bypassing the need for a pharmacy prescription entirely. "Keep her hydrated," Dr. Lin instructed, handing me a paper bag filled with medical supplies. "Bring her back in 3 days if the fever does not break. I will keep this off the official books for now, Rose." I thanked him, securing Mia back into the sedan. With the first dose of medicine already working its way into her system, her breathing began to ease. The immediate physical crisis was managed through quiet professional leverage. Now it was time to address the existential threat ticking away on my desk. I navigated out of Waikiki, steering my car toward the financial district of downtown Honolulu. I bypassed the family law firms and the mediation centers. I did not need a peacemaker, I needed a shark. I parked in front of a sleek, glass-fronted high-rise and took the elevator to the penthouse suite. The gold lettering on the mahogany doors read, "David Chen and Associates, Probate Litigation." David was notorious on the island for tearing apart predatory trusts and exposing hidden assets. He was feared by opposing counsel and revered by his clients. I adjusted my posture, smoothing the wrinkles from my blouse. I had the digital scans on a secure drive in my pocket. The smear campaign was raging online, but I was about to walk into an office and build a legal guillotine. The air conditioning in the penthouse suite hummed a low, steady rhythm, cutting through the thick Hawaiian heat, pressing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat in a high-backed leather chair across from a vast mahogany desk. The surface was meticulously organized, devoid of scattered papers or personal photos. David did not look like a man who spent his life arguing over dead people's money. He wore a crisp white shirt, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with tension. He was a former federal prosecutor who had transitioned to private probate litigation, bringing a predator's instinct to the polite world of family trusts. I had watched him depose a corrupt hotel developer 3 years ago during a corporate audit. He dismantled the man with quiet, terrifying precision, using spreadsheets like a scalpel. Now I needed him to dismantle my sister's boyfriend. I placed my secure tablet on his desk and entered the alphanumeric decryption key. The digital files I had scanned overnight populated on the screen in neat chronological rows. David adjusted his silver-framed glasses and began reading. The silence in the office stretched, punctuated only by the soft, deliberate click of his computer mouse. I watched his eyes scan the property deeds, the offshore shell company registration, and the escrow timeline. He did not gasp. He did not shake his head. A good lawyer processes disaster as raw data. This transaction closes tomorrow morning at exactly 9 o'clock, David stated, his voice a gravelly baritone that commanded instant attention. Once the wire transfer clears the local escrow account and hits that Cayman routing number, the money evaporates into the ether. The international jurisdiction shield will make it nearly impossible to claw back without years of litigation. Mia will be left with nothing. We have less than 24 hours to build a concrete wall around her inheritance. I leaned forward, clasping my hands tightly in my lap to keep my fingers from trembling. "Tell me how we stop the wire transfer," I said. "I have already secured Mia medical care, but I cannot secure her future without legal leverage." David tapped a heavy gold pen against his yellow legal pad. The standard approach for this scenario is an emergency ex parte guardianship order. If a family court judge grants you temporary legal custody based on immediate peril, we can file a direct injunction against the title company, halting the sale pending a full hearing. However, family court judges in Honolulu are notoriously hesitant to strip custody from a surviving biological parent on a weekend notice. We need undeniable proof of imminent harm or severe fraud to secure a judge's signature by midnight tonight. A heavy pink backpack and a canceled flight itinerary will not be enough to satisfy the burden of proof. The judge will simply view this as a domestic squabble over babysitting arrangements. I swiped the tablet screen, pulling up the final set of documents I had found buried at the bottom of a backpack. "I do not just have a canceled flight, David. I have the bait." I enlarged the high-interest commercial bridge loan applications. I pointed to the bottom of the 4th page, tracing the blue ink on the glass screen. "That is my name," I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional, hiding the deep sense of violation gnawing at my stomach. "That is my social security number, and that is a flawless forgery of my signature. Kevin used my identity to secure a short-term loan against the estate equity. He planned to default the moment the primary sale closes and the funds go offshore. They intend to leave me holding a fraudulent bag, forcing me to take the fall for their theft." David stopped tapping his pen. He leaned closer to the screen, scrutinizing the blue ink with hawkish intensity. The air in the room shifted, the energy sharpening into something lethal. "Identity theft," David murmured, a slow, predatory smile forming on his lips. "This changes the entire board. This is no longer a civil family court dispute, Rose. This is a federal crime." I nodded, matching his intensity. "If I report the forgery to the local police precinct, it gets buried in a weekend backlog. But if I file a formal identity theft report directly with the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, what happens to the collateral?" David sat back in his chair, his eyes gleaming with professional admiration. "The federal flag triggers an automatic mandatory freeze on all associated assets. The moment the FBI generates a case number involving the Maui property, the title company is legally paralyzed. They cannot disperse a single dollar until the federal investigation clears. It stops the sale dead in its tracks. The offshore account will sit empty." He spun his keyboard toward him and began typing with rapid, forceful keystrokes. "I am drafting the ex parte injunction right now, attaching the forged loans as our primary exhibit. You need to file the federal report immediately. The system generates a digital receipt with a tracking number within an hour. Once we attach that federal tracking number to the guardianship petition, no judge in Hawaii will deny the emergency order. We will have the legal authority to lock Kevin out of the trust by sundown." I pulled my laptop from my tote bag and connected to his secure guest network. I navigated to the federal reporting portal, my fingers flying across the keys as I detailed the fraudulent loans, the offshore accounts, and the unauthorized use of my personal identifying information. I attached the encrypted scans, double-checking every routing number, every date, every forged letter. As the progress bar crept across my screen, a chilling thought settled over me. The paper trail was damning, but a clever defense attorney could try to spin the narrative. Kevin could claim the offshore company was a legitimate investment vehicle. He could deny knowledge of the forged signatures, shifting the blame to a rogue mortgage broker or a corrupt real estate agent. The documents proved a crime occurred, but to ensure Kevin could never access Mia or her trust fund again, I needed to prove his explicit intent. I needed a confession. I needed him to admit on the record that he orchestrated the heist and abandoned his daughter to facilitate it. How do you get a narcissist to confess? I wondered aloud, watching the federal submission finalize on my screen. David glanced up from his drafting, his expression hardened into a mask of legal strategy. You do not ask them. You let them think they have already won. You give them a stage and you let their ego do the talking. They always trip over their own arrogance. Before I could formulate a plan to trap Kevin into speaking, my cell phone vibrated sharply against the polished mahogany desk. The caller identification displayed the main reception line for my resort employer. A call from the corporate office on a Saturday morning was never a casual check-in. I answered, keeping my voice hushed and controlled. This is Rose. Rose, thank goodness. The panicked voice of my office manager, Zara, spilled through the speaker. Her usual calm demeanor was shattered, replaced by a frantic, breathless pitch. You need to get down here right now. What is wrong? I asked, my pulse quickening. There is a man in the main lobby causing a huge scene, Zara whispered urgently. The sound of raised voices echoing faintly in the background of her call. He says his name is Kevin. He is screaming at the front desk staff, telling guests that you stole his daughter and robbed his house. He is demanding we hand over a pink backpack. Rose, he is threatening to call the local news stations. He is dragging your name through the mud in front of our biggest corporate clients. My blood ran cold. The smear campaign had breached the digital world. Brittany handled the social media assassination from the comfort of their North Shore hideout, and now Kevin was executing the physical attack on my livelihood. My professional reputation, the immaculate record I needed to maintain custody of Mia and validate my FBI report, was currently being shredded in the marble lobby of a 5-star hotel. He was attempting to destroy the only leverage I possessed. Do not engage him, Zara, I instructed, my voice hardening into a blade. Have the security team stand by, but do not let them touch him. I am on my way. I ended the call and stood up, packing my laptop with swift, precise movements. My mind calculated the distance from the law office to the resort. 15 minutes in weekend traffic. David paused his typing, noticing the shift in my posture. Trouble. Kevin is at my office, I replied, slinging my heavy tote bag over my shoulder. He is trying to force my hand by burning down my career. He wants to publicly humiliate me into handing over the evidence. David reached into a desk drawer and handed me a crisp manila folder. Take this. It is a blank cease and desist template. Fill in his name. It might buy you some time to defuse the situation before the police arrive. I declined the folder, shaking my head. A cease and desist is a polite request, David. I am done making requests. I walked out of the penthouse suite and stepped into the elevator. The descent felt like a slow plunge into a battlefield. Kevin wanted a public spectacle. He wanted to use loud, chaotic noise to drown out the truth. He thought he could leverage my corporate job against my silence, banking on my lifelong habit of keeping the peace. He was about to learn that a quiet auditor protecting her own ledger is the most dangerous opponent he could ever face. The drive back to Waikiki blurred past my windshield. I navigated the congested tourist traffic with mechanical precision, my mind compartmentalizing the impending confrontation. I pulled into the subterranean parking structure of the resort, the tires squealing faintly against the polished concrete. I bypassed the employee entrance, taking the guest elevator straight up to the main lobby. The doors parted, revealing a sprawling expanse of imported Italian marble, towering bird-of-paradise floral arrangements, and the faint signature scent of white tea and plumeria. Usually this space is a sanctuary of hushed voices and orchestrated luxury. Today, the tranquility was shattered by a harsh, grating baritone echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Kevin stood near the concierge desk, his face flushed a mottled crimson. He wore the same tailored resort wear from yesterday, but the fabric was wrinkled, sticking to his back in dark, damp patches. He was jabbing his finger towards Zara, my usually unflappable office manager, who stood behind the polished mahogany counter, maintaining a rigid professional posture. "I am not leaving until she comes down here," Kevin shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "She took my daughter. She robbed my house. You tell Rose Howell to get her face out here right now before I call the local news stations and expose this entire corrupt hotel." A dozen wealthy guests lingered near the grand staircase, watching the spectacle with wide, horrified eyes. Uniformed security guards flanked the perimeter, waiting for a signal. I did not rush. I did not raise my voice. A running person signals panic, and a shouting person signals lost control. I walked across the lobby with the measured, even stride of a woman inspecting a faulty spreadsheet. I held a sleek navy blue corporate folder in my left hand. Kevin spotted me. His eyes widened and a triumphant sneer twisted his mouth. "There she is," he sneered, pointing a shaking finger in my direction. "The kidnapper. Where is the pink bag, Rose? Hand it over or I am calling the police right this second." I stopped 2 feet away from him. I could smell the stale alcohol radiating from his pores, mixed with the sour tang of nervous sweat. He was a cornered animal, using volume to compensate for his utter lack of leverage. I did not offer a greeting. I simply extended my arm and pressed the navy blue folder directly into his chest. "Take it," I instructed, my voice dropping to a cool, quiet register that forced him to stop yelling just to hear me. Kevin blinked, thrown off balance by the lack of resistance. He snatched the folder, flipping it open with clumsy, uncoordinated fingers. Inside lay 2 crisp sheets of paper. The top page was a formal trespass warning, printed on heavy corporate letterhead, and signed by the resort general manager. The second page was far more lethal. It was the digital receipt from the federal reporting portal, featuring a bold 14-digit tracking number from the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I watched his eyes scan the text. The transformation was instantaneous. The arrogant sneer melted away, replaced by the slack-jawed expression of a man staring at his own execution order. His shoulders slumped. The color drained from his face so rapidly I thought his knees might buckle. "You cannot step foot on any property owned by this brand ever again," I stated, keeping my tone conversational. "The security team behind you is authorized to place you in physical restraints if you do not exit the building within 60 seconds. As for your threats regarding law enforcement, you do not need to call them. I already did. The federal authorities have flagged the offshore routing numbers. The escrow account is frozen. Your shell company is dead." Kevin opened his mouth, but only a dry, raspy sound emerged. His hands began to tremble so fiercely the papers rattled inside the folder. "You do not understand," he stammered, stepping backward, his bravado entirely extinguished. The words spilled from his mouth in a frantic, disjointed rush. "I had to do it. The private equity guys in Charlotte, they are calling in my debts. I owe them too much. I was just trying to fix it. We had an agreement." "We never had an agreement, Kevin. I never signed a single piece of paper. You forged my name on a federal loan application. I did not forge anything," he blurted out, shaking his head wildly, desperate to deflect the blame. "She said you were on board. She said you agreed to be the silent guarantor because you wanted to help us get a fresh start. She proved it. She gave me the verification details for the background check." I narrowed my eyes. My sister lies like most people breathe, but Kevin was grasping at straws, trying to invent an alibi on the spot. "What verification details?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. The old credit union account, he rambled, wiping a hand across his sweaty forehead. To bypass the initial underwriter flag, the broker needed a secondary proof of long-term financial stability. She gave me the routing digits for a savings account you have held since childhood. She said you kept it active, specifically for emergencies like this. Kevin rattled off a sequence of 9 numbers. The air in the marble lobby vanished. A physical blow to the chest could not have stopped my heart more effectively than that sequence of digits. I stared at him, the polished surroundings fading into a dull, muted blur. I knew those numbers. I knew them intimately. It was a localized credit union account opened when I was 10 years old. I used it to deposit my meager earnings from neighborhood chores and summer tutoring jobs. I had not accessed or mentioned that specific account in 20 years. It held an immaterial balance of maybe $50. It existed entirely off my current financial grid. There were only 2 other people on this earth who knew that routing sequence. My mother, who had opened the custodial account and held the original passbook, and Brittany, who used to sneak into my bedroom, steal the passbook, and forge my juvenile signature to withdraw my saved cash to buy designer clothes she could never afford. The pieces of the puzzle collided in my mind with terrifying, undeniable clarity. Kevin was a desperate, indebted failure, but he was not a skilled forger. He lacked the finesse, the intimate knowledge of my personal history, the precise replication of my handwriting, the flawless loops, the sharp angles of the blue ink on those loan documents. I had assumed someone studied my signature. I was wrong. Someone had grown up watching me write it. Kevin did not forge the signatures. Brittany did. My sister was not a passive girlfriend blindly following a criminal. She was the architect. She was the mastermind pulling the strings from the shadows, using Kevin's desperate financial ruin as the perfect vehicle to liquidate a child's multi-million-dollar trust fund. Brittany wanted the wealthy, carefree lifestyle, and she possessed the exact moral bankruptcy required to steal it from a grieving 8-year-old girl. And Patricia. The realization concerning my mother was a jagged pill, sharp and bitter. Kevin could never have secured my social security number or that childhood routing code on his own. Patricia provided the ammunition. The enabling matriarch, the woman who had forced me to take the blame for stolen pearls 2 decades ago, had secretly handed my entire financial identity to her favorite daughter. Patricia knew the risks. She knew I could face federal prosecution. She simply calculated that my freedom was a fair price to pay to ensure Brittany finally got her big win. The Golden Child and the Enabler had orchestrated the entire heist together, utilizing Kevin as the disposable frontman. I looked at the sweating, pathetic man standing in front of me. He was nothing but a pawn, too blinded by his own debt to realize his girlfriend was setting him up to take the hardest fall. The silence stretched between us. Kevin seemed to realize he had said something monumental, though. His panicked brain could not grasp the gravity of the slip-up. "You need to tell the feds to back off," Kevin pleaded, his voice dropping to a pathetic whine. "If the escrow does not close on Monday, the men in Charlotte are going to find me. You have to fix this, Rose." "I am an auditor, Kevin," I replied, my voice steady, though a localized hurricane was tearing through my chest. "I do not fix fraudulent entries. I expose them. You have 45 seconds left before security physically removes you. I suggest you spend that time running." He stared at me, searching for any trace of mercy in my expression. Finding none, he turned on his heel. He stumbled toward the heavy glass doors, pushing past the bellhops, and fled out into the blinding Hawaiian sunlight. I stood in the center of the lobby, surrounded by the scent of orchids and the curious stares of wealthy tourists. The battle lines had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer fighting a negligent boyfriend trying to cover his debts. I was waging war against my own blood. I was fighting a sister who viewed my life as collateral damage and a mother who supplied the matches to burn my house down. I turned to my office manager. Sarah was watching me, her hand still hovering near the phone on her desk. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice hushed. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," I instructed, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. The tremor in my hands was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. "I need to leave, immediately." I walked briskly toward the parking garage. The ticking clock on the Maui estate was paused by the federal report, but the immediate danger had amplified tenfold. Brittany and Patricia were ruthless, and they were running out of options. When cornered parasites do not retreat, they attack the host. As I unlocked my car door, my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. A text message flashed across the screen. It was from Patricia. "I am coming over to your house right now to pick up Mia. We need to handle this as a family." My stomach plummeted. They were not waiting for the escrow to fail. They were coming for the child. I threw my bag onto the passenger seat and slammed the door, shifting the car into drive. I had to reach the house and secure Mia before my mother arrived, because I knew exactly what Patricia intended to do. She intended to erase the problem, and right now, the problem was me. I navigated the freeway with a singular sharp focus. The afternoon traffic was a sluggish crawl of open-top rental cars and heavy delivery trucks, but my mind raced miles ahead to the small stucco house at the end of my cul-de-sac. My knuckles gripped the leather steering wheel until the skin stretched pale over the bone. The text message from my mother echoed in my head. She was coming to collect Mia. She was coming to erase the evidence. I turned onto my street and hit the brakes. A silver luxury sedan sat idling in my driveway. Patricia had beaten me here. I parked my car haphazardly along the curb, shifted the transmission into park, and rushed across the sun-baked concrete. My mother stepped out of her vehicle, smoothing the wrinkles from her silk blouse. She wore her signature wide-brimmed straw hat and a polite, practiced smile. It was the exact same expression she wore to Sunday brunch at her country club, entirely disconnected from the reality that she had just brokered my financial ruin. I did not stop to greet her. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside, scanning the living room. Mia was still asleep on the sofa, her breathing steady, the dangerous fever finally breaking thanks to the antibiotics provided by Dr. Lin. The pink floral backpack remained safely tucked behind my desk in a home office. The perimeter was temporarily secure. I walked back out onto the porch, pulling the heavy koa wood door shut behind me until the brass latch clicked into place. I stood on the top step, looking down at the woman who had given birth to me. "Rose, darling," Patricia said, climbing the steps with an airy, casual elegance. "What an exhausting morning. Kevin called me in an utter panic. He mumbled something about federal authorities and frozen escrow accounts. You have always had a bad habit of overreacting, but calling the government on your own family is a bridge too far. We need to go inside, pack up the child, and fix this misunderstanding before anyone in our social circle finds out." I stood in the center of the doorway, using my body to block her path. "You are not coming inside, Mom. And you are not taking Mia." Patricia paused, one hand resting lightly on the porch railing. Her polite smile faltered, replaced by a tight, familiar line of irritation. "Do not play stubborn games today, Rose. I am tired. Your sister is in a very fragile state. She made a minor miscalculation with some paperwork, and now you are threatening to derail her life over a clerical technicality. You need to log back onto whatever portal you used to withdraw the complaint and let the real estate transaction close on Monday." A minor miscalculation, I repeated, testing the heavy weight of the lie. She forged my signature on commercial loan applications to steal millions of dollars from an orphaned 8-year-old girl. And she did it using a childhood bank routing number that only you possessed. The humid afternoon air seemed to stall. The rustling palm fronds fell silent. Patricia did not gasp or feign ignorance. She simply adjusted her dark sunglasses, her posture stiffening into a defensive wall of maternal authority. Brittany needed a win. Patricia stated, her voice devoid of any warmth or remorse. You have to understand, Rose. Her life has been a long series of unfair setbacks. Kevin finally offered her a real future, a chance to build something substantial. They just needed a little bridge capital to make the transition smooth. You gave her my social security number, I said, stating the fact out loud to watch it land in the open air. You handed her my financial identity. You have an immaculate credit score, Patricia countered, waving her hand dismissively as if we were discussing a borrowed sweater. You have no debt, no dependents, and a secure corporate salary. You could easily absorb a temporary credit hit. It was a victimless strategy. Once the offshore funds cleared, they were going to pay off the bridge loan. You would not have even noticed the inquiry on your report. You are the reliable one, Rose. You are strong enough to carry a little extra weight for your sister. The betrayal was a physical ache, a dull pressure expanding outward in my chest. She was standing on my porch, justifying felony identity theft with the exact same logic she used when I was 12 years old, holding the neighbor's stolen pearls. I was not a daughter to her. I was an asset. I was a shock absorber, installed by birth to ensure Brittany's ride through life remained smooth and unbothered. I looked past my mother out toward the horizon, where the Pacific Ocean met the sky in a brilliant, deceptive shade of turquoise. Patricia treated family the exact same way tourists treat the Hawaiian shoreline. She saw a shallow, beautiful beach, a pretty backdrop for performed happiness and pristine optics. She wanted the smiling holiday photos and the bragging rights at her bridge club. But I knew the actual ocean. I knew the deep water. The ocean is breathtaking, but it is governed by cold, unforgiving currents. If you disrespect the water, if you ignore the sudden drop-off and underestimate the undertow, it will pull you under and drown you without a second thought. Patricia had spent her entire life playing in the shallows, expecting me to swim out and save Brittany every time she waded too far into the rip current. I am not absorbing this hit, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a cool, quiet register that cut right through her practiced excuses. I am not withdrawing the federal report. I am not signing the escrow release, and I am never letting you or Brittany use my life as collateral again. Patricia's face flushed a mottled red, the polite mask finally shattering. If you do this, Rose, you will destroy this family. I will never forgive you for this betrayal. You will be entirely alone. I looked at the woman who had traded my freedom for her favorite daughter's luxury lifestyle. I would rather be alone than be your human shield, I replied. Get off my property. If you ever return, I will have the police cite you for trespassing. She stared at me, searching my eyes for the compliant, understanding girl she had trained for 3 decades. She found a financial auditor instead. Patricia turned on her heel, marched down the concrete steps, and climbed into her silver sedan. She sped away, leaving a faint cloud of exhaust hanging in the thick, humid air. The lifelong tether between us snapped, and for the first time in my 34 years, I felt the terrifying, exquisite weight of true independence. I turned and walked back into my house, pushing the heavy wood door shut. The deadbolt slid into place with a satisfying metallic thud. The perimeter was secure. The emotional war with my mother was over. I exhaled, leaning my forehead against the cool painted wood of the entryway. We just needed to survive the weekend until the probate judge signed the emergency guardianship papers on Monday morning. But as I stepped away from the door and into the living room, a harsh, sweeping beam of light sliced through the gaps in the window blinds. Twin headlights cut across the far wall, illuminating my framed artwork in a stark, blinding glare. Heavy tires crunched onto the gravel at the edge of my front lawn. Car doors slammed shut, the sound echoing ominously in the quiet neighborhood. The real battle was just arriving. The harsh, sweeping beam of halogen headlights sliced through the narrow gaps in my window blinds. Twin beams of blinding white light cut across my living room wall, illuminating the framed artwork in a stark, unforgiving glare. Heavy tires crunched onto the gravel at the edge of my front lawn, followed immediately by the heavy thud of car doors slamming shut. The sound echoed ominously in the quiet residential cul-de-sac. I did not retreat into the shadows. I walked straight toward the entryway. The wooden floorboards felt cool beneath my bare feet. I reached the front door and peered through the frosted side panels. 4 figures stood on the concrete walkway leading to my porch. I recognized the first 2 immediately. Kevin marched in the lead, his posture rigid, a white rectangular document gripped tightly in his right hand. Right behind him was my sister. Brittany had changed her clothes since the morning. She now wore a modest, dark sweater, her blonde hair pulled back into a messy knot. It was a deliberate costume change, a calculated shift from the glamorous vacationer to the distressed, victimized mother. Flanking them were 2 broad-shouldered men wearing dark navy uniforms. At first glance, the setup was designed to paralyze a civilian with fear. The presence of law enforcement triggers an ingrained automatic compliance in most people. You see a badge, you see a uniform, and you open the door. I am not most people. I am an auditor. My entire career is built on verifying credentials and identifying fraudulent presentation. I opened the heavy inner wooden door, but kept the reinforced steel mesh security screen firmly shut. I slid the secondary deadbolt into its housing with a loud metallic click. The porch light flickered on, casting a harsh yellow glow over the 4 people crowded onto my top step. Brittany launched into her performance the exact second the light hit her face. "Rose," she cried out, her voice pitching into a theatrical, trembling wail. "How could you do this to me? How could you take my little girl?" She threw her hands up, clutching the collar of her dark sweater, and let out a breathless, jagged sob. She turned her head slightly, her eyes darting toward the neighboring houses, verifying that the sound of her crying was loud enough to draw an audience. She was putting on a masterful performance of a grieving, desperate mother fighting to rescue her stolen child. It was a staggering display of manipulation, considering she had willingly dumped the child on this exact same porch less than 3 days ago to facilitate a multi-million-dollar heist. "Please, Rose," Brittany begged, pressing her hands against the steel mesh of the screen door. "Just give her back. Bring Mia out here right now. We do not want to see you go to jail. We just want our family back." Kevin stepped forward, interrupting her performance with a sharp, authoritative tone. He held the white paper up, pressing it flat against the screen so I could read the text. "The game is over," Rose Kevin stated, attempting to project a commanding presence. "We went to the judge. This is a court order demanding the immediate return of my daughter and all of her personal property, including her backpack. These officers are here to enforce the mandate. Open the door and hand over the child, or they will break it down and arrest you for kidnapping." I did not look at the paper right away. I looked at the 2 men standing behind him. They stood tall, their hands resting near their thick black utility belts. To the untrained eye, they looked like authentic law enforcement, but under the yellow glare of the porch light, the details began to fray. The fabric of their uniforms was a cheap synthetic blend, lacking the structured tailoring of standard-issue gear. Their duty belts held handcuffs and flashlights, but neither man carried a service weapon or a standard-issue radio. More importantly, I looked at their chests. The metal shields pinned to their shirts were generic silver stars, the kind purchased from a uniform supply catalog. They did not bear the distinctive multicolored crest of the Honolulu Police Department. There were no name tags, no precinct insignia patches on their shoulders. Real police officers in Hawaii carry themselves with a specific procedural calm. They introduce themselves, they state their precinct, and they take control of the situation. These men were hanging back in the shadows, letting a civilian direct the interaction. They were not sworn officers. They were hired muscle, dressed in costume shop uniforms, paid to intimidate me into handing over the evidence. My gaze shifted from the fake officers to the document pressed against the mesh screen. Kevin was tapping his finger against the paper, urging me to read it. I leaned closer. The document was printed on standard, lightweight copy paper. A genuine family court order is printed on heavier stock. It features a raised embossed watermark from the state of Hawaii. It carries a prominent blue or red ink stamp from the county clerk verifying the filing date. It requires the physical wet signature of a presiding judge. The paper Kevin held featured a generic, poorly formatted header. The text was plagued by uneven margins. At the bottom of the page, there was a simple photocopied signature printed in flat black ink. There was no judicial seal. There was no docket number. It was a pathetic forgery, drafted on a word processor and printed just minutes ago. They were truly desperate. The federal freeze I initiated that morning had paralyzed their offshore escrow transfer, and now they were attempting a crude, physical shakedown to reclaim the forged loan documents. I stepped back from the screen door. The cold logic of the situation crystallized in my mind. They had cornered themselves. I reached under the wooden console table in my entryway. My fingertips brushed against a small, discreet plastic device taped beneath the ledge. Earlier that afternoon, when David, the probate lawyer, realized Kevin was unstable enough to ambush my workplace, he had handed me this device. It was a dedicated panic button linked to a private security firm that routed direct priority calls to a specific precinct captain David trusted. I pressed the button, holding it down for 3 seconds, until a tiny green light flashed, confirming the signal had been transmitted. Help was on the way. I just needed to stall them until the real authorities arrived. I returned to the screen door, crossing my arms over my chest. I maintained a posture of mild, bureaucratic curiosity. "Hold the paper still, Kevin," I instructed, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "The light is causing a glare. I need to read the authorizing signature." Kevin frowned, clearly expecting me to panic or cry. He pressed the paper harder against the mesh. "Read it and weep, Rose. The judge signed it an hour ago." "Which judge?" I asked, tilting my head. "I do not see a printed name under the signature line." In the Hawaii family court system, emergency custody orders are processed through the First Circuit. Was this signed by Judge Nakamura or Judge Silva? Kevin hesitated. His eyes darted nervously toward Brittany. "It was the duty judge," he stammered, his confident facade cracking. "It does not matter what his name is. The order is valid." "It matters significantly," I replied, my tone sharpening into the precise interrogating cadence of a financial audit. "A valid court order also requires a specific docket tracking number located in the upper right-hand corner. Your document has a blank margin. Furthermore, the Honolulu Family Court does not process ex parte emergency petitions on Saturday evenings unless it is a life or death domestic violence situation which requires an accompanying police report." "Do you have the police report, Kevin?" Brittany stepped forward, her theatrical crying dropping instantly. "Stop stalling, you miserable witch!" she hissed, her true venomous nature breaking through the grieving mother routine. "Break the door down," she commanded, turning to the 2 hired men. "Kick it in and grab the bag." The 2 fake officers shifted uncomfortably. Breaking and entering a private residence was a severe felony, a line they were likely not being paid enough to cross. One of the men cleared his throat, looking at Kevin with a sudden, dawning hesitation. "You said this was just a property retrieval," Man the hired thug muttered, taking a half step away from the porch. "You did not say nothing about breaking down doors." "Just do what I paid you to do," Kevin snapped, the sweat on his forehead glistening under the yellow porch light. I leaned closer to the mesh screen. "I would highly advise against touching my door, gentlemen," I said, projecting my voice so the hired men could hear every word clearly. "I am a corporate financial auditor. The paper you are looking at is a forged document. The man who hired you is currently under investigation by the federal government for identity theft and wire fraud. If you attempt to breach this residence, you will not be participating in a property retrieval. You will be acting as accomplices in a federal conspiracy. The two men exchanged a rapid, panicked look. The illusion of their authority had completely evaporated. "Shut up!" Kevin yelled, his voice echoing loudly down the quiet street. He pounded his fist against the steel mesh, the impact rattling the doorframe. "You are making this up! You have nothing! Open this door right now!" I did not flinch. I stood my ground on the hardwood floor, watching the man orchestrate his own spectacular demise. I did not need to argue with him. I did not need to raise my voice. I just needed to wait. A faint, rhythmic sound began to drift through the humid night air. It started as a distant, high-pitched wail echoing off the volcanic ridges that framed the neighborhood. The sound grew steadily louder, a sharp, piercing siren cutting through the calm Hawaiian evening. Kevin froze. His fist remained suspended in the air. Brittany spun around, her eyes wide with sudden, unadulterated terror staring down the dark street. The fake officers did not wait for instructions. They turned and sprinted toward their unmarked sedan, desperate to flee the scene before the real authorities arrived. The cavalry was here, and the trap was finally springing shut. The piercing wail of the siren peaked, vibrating through the humid night air, and then rapidly faded. A heavy fire response vehicle barreled down the distant coastal highway, bypassing our residential street entirely. The flashing emergency lights vanished behind a row of tall banyan trees. The cul-de-sac plunged back into a dense, oppressive quiet. The two hired thugs in the cheap uniforms were already gone. Their unmarked sedan had peeled out of the neighborhood the second they heard the distant siren, leaving a cloud of burnt rubber lingering over the asphalt. They did not care if the siren was meant for us or a warehouse fire 3 towns over. They were criminals of convenience, and they had abandoned ship the moment the situation felt risky. It was just the 3 of us now. Brittany let out a sharp, mocking laugh that shattered the tension. She pressed her face closer to the steel mesh of my security screen. "Nice try, Rose," my sister taunted, her voice dripping with venomous triumph. "You always were a terrible liar. Did you really think a passing ambulance was going to save you? There is no cavalry coming. You have no leverage. You are just a sad, lonely auditor trapped in a house with a kid nobody wants." Kevin puffed his chest out, recovering his lost bravado now that the perceived threat had evaporated. He slapped his hand against a wooden pillar on the porch. "Open the door," Rose Kevin demanded, his tone hardening into a sneer. "We are done playing games. Give us the pink bag. You are going to sign the escrow release form right now, and then we are walking away." I did not unlock the deadbolt. Instead, I reached into the deep pocket of my linen slacks. My fingers brushed against a small rectangular object. It was the cheap plastic prepaid cell phone I had extracted from Mia's floral backpack earlier that evening. The device Kevin intended to use for untraceable offshore communications was about to serve a very different purpose. I tapped the screen to wake the device. Navigating to the pre-installed applications, I opened the digital voice recorder. I pressed the red circular button. The timer began ticking upward. 1 second, 2 seconds. I moved silently toward the heavy koa wood door. About waist high, an antique brass mail slot was installed directly into the wood. I carefully lifted the interior metal flap and slid the prepaid phone halfway through the narrow opening, resting it securely on the hinge. The microphone was now positioned outside the protective barrier of my home, pointed directly at the 2 people standing on my welcome mat. I needed to secure the final piece of the puzzle. The financial documents scanned into my encrypted server proved a crime was occurring, but courtrooms run on the establishment of intent. I needed my sister to articulate her guilt. I needed her to claim ownership of the forgery out loud. I stepped back and wrapped my arms around my chest, projecting an image of utter defeat. I let my shoulders slump, softening my voice to mimic a woman who had finally been broken by the pressure. "I do not understand, Brittany," I said, allowing a deliberate tremor to enter my words. "Why did you choose me for this? How did you even pull off the signature? The bank underwriters are incredibly strict. They cross-reference everything." Brittany inhaled sharply, her ego inflating at the sound of my submission. Narcissists cannot resist a captive audience, especially when they believe they have outsmarted their primary rival. She stepped directly in front of the mail slot, practically speaking into the hidden microphone. "Because you are predictable, Rose," she boasted, a cruel smile stretching across her face. "You spend your entire life following the rules, making sure everyone else's ledgers are balanced. You were the perfect blind spot. The underwriters did not flag a single thing because your credit history is spotless." But my signature, I pressed, maintaining my defeated posture. The commercial loan application had my exact handwriting. "How did you bypass the identity verification?" My sister let out a delighted, condescending sigh. "It was remarkably easy. Mom gave me the routing digits to your childhood savings account. She handed over your social security number weeks ago. Patricia knew Kevin and I needed startup capital for our new life, and she knew you would never willingly help us. So we helped ourselves." The admission hung in the warm tropical air, captured permanently by the digital recording device. "I practiced tracing your signature for 3 days," Brittany continued, her tone practically glowing with self-satisfaction. "I used those old birthday cards you send Mom every year. I perfected the sharp angles, I signed your name on the commercial bridge loan, and I signed it on the emergency guardianship petition. You were always so proud of your flawless corporate reputation. It made the perfect collateral for our $6.5 million payday." "And Mia?" I asked, keeping my gaze locked on her face. "What was your actual plan for the child? You abandoned an 8-year-old girl," Kevin scoffed from the edge of the porch. "The kid is collateral damage," he interjected, his voice callous and impatient. "I cannot take her to Europe, and I certainly cannot bring her to the Caymans. Once the Maui estate funds clear escrow on Monday morning, we are boarding a private charter. You are the temporary guardian now, Rose. You can keep her or you can drop her in the foster system. We truly do not care." Brittany leaned her forehead against the steel mesh, her eyes wide and manic. "We are taking the money, Rose. We are starting over. You are going to take the fall for the fraudulent loan, and by the time the federal agents figure out the money is sitting in an untraceable offshore shell company, Kevin and I will be untouchable. Now slide the pink bag out here and sign the escrow release, or I swear I will make sure Mom ruins whatever is left of your miserable life." I stood silently in my foyer, absorbing the sheer magnitude of their depravity. They were openly bragging about forging federal documents, stealing millions from an orphan child, and leaving me to face a prison sentence. The dramatic irony was a heavy, palpable force in the room. They believed they were standing on the precipice of ultimate victory. They believed they held all the power. They had no idea what was happening right behind them. Through the frosted glass side panels framing my front door, the street outside was undergoing a rapid, silent transformation. 3 large, dark utility vehicles glided into the cul-de-sac. Their headlights were entirely extinguished. There were no sirens, no flashing emergency lights to announce their arrival. The engines emitted a low, stealthy hum, rolling to a synchronized stop at the edge of my property line. One of the heavy tactical vehicles angled itself directly behind Kevin's least luxury SUV, blocking any possible avenue of retreat. The vehicle doors swung open in unison. Figures clad in dark tactical gear stepped out onto the asphalt. The glow of the street lamp illuminated the bold white lettering stamped across the backs of their ballistic vests. HPD, Honolulu Police Department. Woven among the local officers were two individuals wearing windbreakers bearing the distinct insignia of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. David, my probate attorney, had not just triggered a standard patrol dispatch. The panic button routed a priority signal to a precinct captain who understood the gravity of the federal identity theft report I had filed earlier that day. They were not responding to a simple domestic disturbance. They were moving in to secure prime suspects in an active multi-million-dollar wire fraud conspiracy. The officers moved with lethal, practiced efficiency. They fanned out across my manicured front lawn, their boots making no sound against the damp grass. They formed a tight, inescapable semicircle around my porch. Brittany was blissfully oblivious to the tactical maneuver unfolding at her back. She was too intoxicated by her own perceived brilliance, too busy basking in the glow of her venomous monologue. "I am waiting," Rose Brittany snapped, tapping her manicured fingernails against the steel security mesh. Her voice was shrill, grating against the silence of the night. "Go get a pen. Go get the bag. If you do exactly what I say, maybe I will wire you a few $1,000s next year to cover your legal defense fees." I reached into the brass mail slot. My fingers brushed the smooth plastic of the burner phone. I pressed the red circular button on the screen terminating the voice memo application. The digital timer stopped. The file saved automatically to the device storage. A full, uncoerced, highly detailed confession to federal forgery, identity theft, and grand larceny, all neatly packaged in a high-definition audio file. I withdrew the phone and slipped it back into the pocket of my slacks. I stood up straight, abandoning the slumped, defeated posture. I looked directly into my sister's eyes. The fear was fully gone from my system, replaced by a cold, unyielding resolve. "I do not need your money, Brittany," I said, my voice resuming its natural, authoritative cadence. "And I will not be needing a defense attorney." Brittany frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you talking about? You have no choice." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the expression of a financial auditor who just balanced a deeply corrupt ledger. "I suggest you turn around," I advised softly. Kevin noticed the shift in my demeanor. He glanced over his shoulder. The color drained from his face with such sudden force that he appeared physically ill. He took a stumbling step backward, his boat shoes scraping against the wooden porch boards, and collided hard with the porch railing. Brittany spun around, her mouth opening to hurl another insult. The words died in her throat. Standing at the bottom of my front steps, illuminated by the soft yellow glow of my porch light, were 6 heavily armed officers. They had their hands resting casually over their holstered weapons, their expressions grim and unyielding. The trap I had meticulously built, piece by piece throughout the weekend, had finally snapped shut, and the predators were caught dead center in the steel jaws. A sudden, blinding illumination eradicated the darkness of my front yard. The silent tactical vehicles that had glided into the cul-de-sac simultaneously ignited their overhead light bars. Brilliant flashes of red and blue strobes flooded the manicured lawn, bouncing off the stucco walls of my house and casting frantic spinning shadows across the pavement. The quiet Hawaiian night was instantly transformed into a high-stakes crime scene. From the shadows near the street, sharp and authoritative commands sliced through the humid air. 2 uniformed Honolulu police officers marched up the center of my driveway, escorting a very familiar pair of men. The 2 hired thugs who had posed as fake law enforcement had not escaped after all. They had peeled out of my neighborhood only to drive directly into a perimeter blockade established by the responding federal task force. Now they were walking back toward my porch, with their heads bowed and their hands raised high above their shoulders, their fingers interlaced in a posture of total surrender. The cheap tin stars pinned to their synthetic uniforms caught the harsh glare of the police strobes, highlighting the pathetic reality of their costume. Brittany stared at the flashing lights, her eyes darting frantically from the captured thugs to the tactical officers forming an impenetrable wall around the property line. Her mind struggled to process the sudden collapse of her flawless criminal strategy. But narcissists possess a terrifying reflex for self-preservation. Faced with undeniable reality, my sister chose to double down on her fabricated delusion. She spun around to face the officers approaching the porch, her face contorting into an expression of exaggerated, hysterical relief. She threw her hands out toward the approaching authorities, instantly adopting the persona of a victimized mother rescued at the 11th hour. "Thank God you are here!" Brittany screamed, her voice shrill and trembling with weaponized tears. She pointed a manicured finger directly at the steel mesh of my security door. "My sister has gone insane. She kidnapped my daughter. She locked herself inside the house and is refusing to give my little girl back to us. Please, you have to break down that door. She is unstable and she is holding my child hostage." Her performance was seamless, delivered with the fierce conviction of a woman who genuinely believed she could manipulate any audience. She expected the officers to draw their weapons to view me as a barricaded suspect, to treat her as the grieving victim. She expected the loud, chaotic noise of her accusations to drown out the quiet, documented facts of the situation. The officers did not draw their weapons. They did not rush the porch. They advanced with slow, calculated precision, their focus locked entirely on the adults standing outside the house. A tall, broad-shouldered man, wearing a dark windbreaker emblazoned with the federal insignia, stepped forward, separating himself from the local patrol units. He was the lead detective, a seasoned investigator who radiated an aura of quiet, immovable authority. He ignored Brittany completely, his gaze bypassing her frantic gestures to focus on the front entrance of my home. I did not wait for him to address me. The time for hiding behind barricades had passed. I reached out and unlatched the heavy steel deadbolts. The metallic clicks sounded incredibly loud against the backdrop of the flashing sirens. I pushed open the solid koa wood door and then slowly opened the outer security screen. I stepped out onto the porch, leaving the protective shell of my house behind. I did not cower. I did not raise my hands. I moved with the calm, practiced, steady grace of a financial auditor entering a boardroom to present a finalized report. I wore simple linen slacks and a cotton blouse, but, in that moment, I felt as though I was wearing impenetrable armor. The air outside was thick with tension, smelling of ozone and exhaust fumes, but my mind was crystal clear. Brittany lunged forward, attempting to block my path to the detective. "Grab her!" she shrieked, spit flying from her lips as her fabricated panic morphed into genuine, unhinged rage. "She is the one you want! Arrest her, right now!" An officer stepped into her path, extending a rigid arm to hold her back. "Ma, you need to step down to the grass," the officer instructed, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. I walked past my sister, refusing to even acknowledge her presence. I descended the 2 concrete steps and approached the lead detective. I stopped a polite distance away, maintaining direct, professional eye contact. "I am Rose Howell," I stated, my voice projecting clearly over the ambient noise of the idling police vehicles. "I am the individual who filed the federal identity theft and wire fraud report this morning." The detective nodded, once his expression serious. "You indicated you had physical evidence of an impending fraudulent transaction, Miss Howell." I reached into my pocket and retrieved the encrypted flash drive I had prepared. I held it out to him. "This drive contains high-resolution scans of forged commercial bridge loan applications, counterfeit family court emergency guardianship petitions, and bank statements detailing the unauthorized transfer of funds to an offshore shell company." The detective accepted the small metal drive, securing it inside an evidence pouch. I then reached back into my pocket and retrieved the cheap plastic prepaid cell phone. I handed it to him alongside the drive. Furthermore, I said, keeping my gaze locked on his face, this device contains an audio recording captured less than 5 minutes ago. On this recording, the woman screaming on my lawn explicitly details her methodology for forging my signature, utilizing stolen financial routing numbers and orchestrating the theft of her stepdaughter's multi-million-dollar trust fund. It is a full, uncoerced confession. The detective looked at the burner phone in his hand, then looked up at me, a flicker of genuine professional respect crossing his features. Thank you, Ms. Howell. We will take it from here. He turned his attention toward the suspects. He raised a hand signaling the tactical units surrounding the porch. Detain them, the detective ordered. The response was instantaneous. 3 officers moved swiftly up the steps. They did not read Miranda rights immediately. They executed a rapid physical detainment to secure the scene. One officer grabbed Kevin by the shoulder, spinning him around and forcing his hands behind his back. The metallic zip and click of heavy-duty handcuffs echoed sharply in the humid air. The reality of the cold steel snapping shut around his wrists broke Kevin instantly. The fragile facade of the confident, powerful businessman crumbled into dust. His knees buckled, his body going limp as the officers hauled him upright. The realization that his offshore escape route was destroyed, that the federal government possessed the full scope of his financial crimes, triggered a profound and spectacular cowardice. "Wait!" Kevin screamed, his voice pitching into a high, desperate whine. His eyes bulged with terror as he struggled weakly against the officer's grip. "You do not understand. I did not do this. It was not me." He turned his head, his neck straining, and pointed a shaking, frantic finger directly at Brittany. "She did it!" Kevin shrieked, the words tumbling from his mouth in a breathless rush to save his own skin. "It was all her idea. She stole the social security numbers. She forged the signatures on the loan documents. I did not even know how to bypass the underwriter checks. She hired those fake cops to scare her sister. She told me we could take the estate money and leave the kid behind. I just wanted a clean break. She is the mastermind." The admission echoed across the front lawn, louder than the idling engines of the police cruisers. In his desperate bid for leniency, Kevin had just confirmed every single detail on the audio recording. He had thrown the golden child squarely under the tires of the incoming federal prosecution, severing their toxic partnership in a matter of seconds. The truth had finally been dragged out of the shadows and exposed under the harsh, glaring lights of authority setting the stage for an unprecedented collapse. The humid Hawaiian air stalled, growing thick and suffocating around the porch. Brittany stared at the man she intended to build a stolen empire with. Kevin was trembling in the firm grip of the federal tactical officers, his shoulders hunched in a posture of pathetic defeat. The reality of his cowardly betrayal hit her like a physical strike. Her eyes widened, the dark pupils dilating rapidly under the harsh, spinning glare of the police strobe lights. For 29 years, my sister had manipulated every single narrative to position herself as either the tragic victim or the flawless victor. Now cornered on a manicured lawn and betrayed by her own accomplice, her pristine facade cracked and fell away into sharp, jagged pieces. She did not retreat into a dignified silence. A cornered parasite attacks whatever is closest. She lunged toward Kevin, her manicured hands formed into rigid claws, her voice tearing out of her throat in a raw, unhinged shriek. The nearest officer caught her shoulder, twisting her arms expertly and securely behind her back. The metallic ratcheting of heavy steel handcuffs securing her wrists seemed to break the final protective seal on her sanity. Realizing she was trapped, Brittany chose destruction. If she was going down, she was going to drag him into the depths with her. She began to confess. She screamed every detailed element of the conspiracy she could summon, desperate to ensure Kevin suffered the exact same punitive fate. She told the surrounding officers about the private equity debt in Charlotte, detailing how Kevin begged her to help him steal the estate in Maui to avoid his creditors. She admitted to tracing the forged signatures, shouting that Kevin was too ignorant to understand the complex underwriting process required by the commercial lenders. She bragged about setting up the Cayman Islands routing numbers, eager to prove she was the intellectual architect of the heist. The officers did not interrupt her tirade. They stood perfectly still, their expressions guarded and neutral. I watched the center of their dark tactical vests. Small, square devices were mounted to the ballistic fabric, each displaying a solid, unblinking red indicator light. High-definition body cameras were actively recording every frantic, self-incriminating word. Financial crimes require prosecutors to establish a clear intent to defraud. It is often the hardest element to prove in a courtroom. Brittany was handing the federal investigators that exact intent on a silver platter, gift-wrapped in her own arrogance. Every syllable she spoke tightened the legal noose around her own neck. She was performing my job for me, finalizing the audit of her own ruined life. A sudden screech of tires pierced the audio of Brittany shouting. A familiar silver luxury sedan had bypassed the police barricade at the end of the block, jumping the concrete curb to park haphazardly on the damp grass. The driver door flung open. Patricia stumbled out into the heavy night air. My mother had parked down the street to monitor the situation, fully expecting to watch me surrender the pink backpack to the fake officers. Now, witnessing a federal task force physically dismantle her favorite daughter, her composed country club demeanor dissolved into sheer panic. Her expensive silk blouse was wrinkled, her signature wide-brimmed hat was missing. She ran across the dark asphalt, her designer heels clicking a frantic, uneven rhythm against the pavement. Rose Patricia wailed, pushing past a grouping of stunned neighbors who had gathered at the edges of their driveways to watch the spectacle. She reached the police line, extending her trembling arms toward the lead detective. "Stop this, right now!" my mother commanded, her voice thick with delusion and denial. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding here. My daughters are just having a minor disagreement over a babysitting schedule. Let her go this instant!" The lead detective stepped into her path, his posture forming an immovable wall of state authority. "Ma'am," he instructed, his tone firm and devoid of any personal empathy. "You need to step back onto the sidewalk. These individuals are under arrest for suspected federal wire fraud and identity theft. This is an active crime scene, and you are interfering with an official investigation." Patricia spun toward me, her eyes wide with desperate pleading. She grabbed the wooden railing of my porch, her knuckles turning white from the strain. "Tell them, Rose," she begged, tears spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her careful makeup. "Tell them you authorized the loan. Tell them you changed your mind and forgot to file the paperwork. You can fix this. You always fix everything for us. Just tell them it was a clerical mistake and they will let her go." I looked down at the woman who had given birth to me. For 3 decades, she had trained me to act as the human shock absorber for every single collision Brittany caused. She expected me to perjure myself, to risk a lengthy federal prison sentence, simply to preserve the fragile illusion of her perfect family. I felt no anger rising in my chest. I felt no sorrow clouding my vision. The emotional tether that had bound me to her toxic expectations had been cleanly severed earlier that afternoon. I felt nothing but the calm, sterile clarity of a finalized accounting ledger. I walked to the edge of the top step looking down at my mother. The red and blue emergency lights washed over her tear-stained face, exposing every line of age and manufactured grief. She treated our lives like a balance sheet where my worth was always calculated as a deficit, existing only to offset the enormous debts incurred by my sister. "The math does not lie, Mom," I said, my voice projecting crisp and level over the noise of the idling police engines. "I cannot balance this ledger." Patricia stared up at me. The breath left her lungs in a hollow, defeated rush. She searched my face for any trace of the compliant, desperate girl she used to control with a simple scolding tone. She found a stranger instead. She let go of the porch railing, her arms dropping limply to her sides. She understood in that exact moment that the endless reservoir of my compliance had finally run dry. The tactical officers moved in unison, wrapping up the scene. They guided Kevin toward the first dark utility vehicle, pressing their hands down on his head as they folded his trembling body into the secure back seat. Another pair of officers escorted Brittany toward the second vehicle. She had exhausted her voice, her fierce screams fading into harsh, jagged gasps for air. She looked back at me one final time through the reinforced window as the heavy door slammed shut. There was no defiance left in her eyes, only the hollow, sinking terror of a woman realizing her captive audience was permanently gone. The engines of the tactical vehicles revved, sending a low rumble through the ground. The thick tires gripped the asphalt. They drove away in a tight, synchronized convoy, leaving the quiet cul-de-sac behind. The flashing lights faded into the distance, quickly swallowed by the dark, expansive Hawaiian night. The street was eerily silent. A few neighbors lingered on their lawns, murmuring in hushed tones, but they quickly retreated into their homes, shutting their doors against the lingering tension. Patricia stood alone on the edge of my driveway for a long time, an isolated figure, bathed in the dim glow of the street lamp. The tropical breeze rustled the palm fronds above her head, but she remained frozen in place. She did not say another word to me. There were no more threats to issue, no more guilt trips to deploy. She turned, walked slowly back to her silver sedan, and drove away without looking back. I stood alone on my porch. The thick, humid air settled comfortably around me. The loud, toxic noise that had defined my entire family dynamic was gone. It had been silenced not by screaming, not by arguing, but by the cold, irrefutable weight of documented paper. The shadows on the lawn stretched long and peaceful. I turned around, grasped the brass handle of my front door, and walked back inside to check on the little girl sleeping safely in my living room. 6 months have passed since the flashing emergency lights faded from my street, taking the chaos of my biological relatives with them. The unpredictable winter swells of the Pacific Ocean have surrendered to the gentle, steady rhythm of the spring trade winds. My life looks fundamentally different now. I still work as a financial auditor, analyzing corporate ledgers and identifying structural weaknesses for the resort brand, but my true focus has shifted away from the office. My sanctuary is no longer just an empty, quiet house where I hide from the world. It is a home filled with the reassuring daily sounds of a child discovering she is finally safe. I stood on my wooden lanai on a Tuesday afternoon, holding a ceramic mug of warm Kona coffee. The deck felt solid and grounded beneath my feet. Out in the grassy yard, Mia was practicing a traditional hula routine she had learned at her new local school. A portable speaker played a rhythmic, soothing chant. The terrified, silent girl, who had arrived on my porch clutching a pink backpack full of federal crimes, was gone. In her place was a vibrant, thriving 8-year-old who spent her weekends collecting frosted sea glass with me on the windward beaches. She moved with a fluid, confident grace, her dark hair catching the golden afternoon sunlight. She finished her routine, spotted me watching from the porch, and ran over to the edge of the wooden deck. She looked up, her eyes bright and clear, and asked if we could go get shaved ice later. I smiled and told her yes. Then she paused, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, and asked a question that shifted the axis of my entire world. She asked if she could start calling me Mom. It was a quiet moment, lacking the loud, performative drama of my biological family, but it was the most profound victory of my life. I knelt down to her eye level, told her she could call me whatever made her feel most protected, and felt a deep, enduring peace settle over my chest. The systemic roadblocks were gone. I was her permanent legal guardian, and we were a chosen family. The mail carrier arrived an hour later, disrupting the afternoon tranquility with the sharp snap of the metal mailbox lid down by the curb. I walked down the driveway and pulled out a small stack of envelopes. Hidden between a water bill and a local grocery circular was a thick, cream-colored envelope. I recognized the cursive handwriting instantly. The looping, elegant script belonged to my mother, Patricia. I had blocked her phone number and intercepted her digital messages months ago, severing the toxic tether that tied me to her endless manipulation. Desperate to regain control and force a dialogue, she had resorted to physical mail. I carried the envelope back to the kitchen counter. I did not need to tear it open to know what it contained, but the auditor inside me always verifies the data before closing a file. I sliced the paper flap open and unfolded 3 pages of dense, handwritten text. The letter was a masterpiece of manufactured grief and calculated guilt. Patricia did not offer a single apology for handing my financial identity to a thief. Instead, she painted herself as the ultimate victim of a fractured family. She detailed Brittany's current struggles with her court-ordered community service, complaining that the manual labor on the hot beaches was ruining her health and destroying her social standing. The core of the letter, however, was a series of audacious demands. Patricia insisted that I withdraw the civil restitution claims, arguing that draining Brittany's bank accounts to recover the stolen $50,000 was an act of cruel vengeance. She demanded I release a portion of the Maui estate funds to help them pay for living expenses, insisting that Kevin had left them in a terrible financial bind. She ended the letter with a manipulative plea, telling me that blood always forgives and ordering me to bring us back together before the damage to our family became permanent. 10 years ago, receiving a letter like that would have sent me into a spiral of anxious compliance. The old version of Rose Howell would have opened a fresh spreadsheet. I would have calculated exactly how much money I could afford to send them without jeopardizing my own mortgage. I would have drafted a careful, apologetic response trying to explain my side while absorbing all of their misplaced anger. I would have accepted the role of the reliable shock absorber, sacrificing my own stability to smooth out the bumps they created. But the woman reading that letter was not the girl who took the blame for a stolen pearl necklace 2 decades ago. That girl was gone, replaced by someone who understood that transactional affection is just a predatory loan in disguise. I did not cry. I did not feel a familiar tightening in my chest. I read the final sentence, folded the 3 pages back into a neat square, and slipped them back into the cream envelope. I reached across my granite kitchen island and picked up a red felt-tip pen, the exact kind I used to mark critical errors on corporate tax returns. I uncapped the pen and pressed the bright red ink against the front of the envelope. I wrote 3 words across the center, pressing hard enough to leave indentations in the thick paper. Return to sender. I did not add a note. I did not provide an explanation. A closed door is a complete sentence. I walked straight back down the driveway, placed the envelope into the outgoing mail slot, and raised the red metal flag. I turned my back on my mother's demands and walked away, feeling lighter with every step. I returned to the lanai and looked out over the vast blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The water stretched out toward the horizon, deep and powerful, governed by natural laws that ignore human entitlement. The quiet women in this world are always expected to absorb the chaos. We are conditioned from childhood to carry the emotional and financial debts of the loud, selfish people who share our bloodline. We are taught that standing up for ourselves is an act of betrayal, that demanding respect is a sign of arrogance. We are trained to hold the heavy tray serving everyone else while our own plates remain empty. When you spend your entire life balancing other people's ledgers, you eventually realize that some deficits can never be corrected. Brittany and Patricia operated on a business model of endless consumption. They believed my resources, my energy, and my very identity were simply assets they could leverage for their own gain. When they ran out of my goodwill, they targeted an 8-year-old child. They underestimated the quiet auditor because they mistook silence for weakness. They failed to realize that a person who spends their life analyzing data knows exactly how to spot a fatal vulnerability. I did not defeat them by matching their noise. I defeated them by securing the paper trail, leveraging the law, and removing myself from their toxic economy entirely. Mia will grow up in a house where love is not a conditional currency. She will learn that trust is earned through consistent actions, not demanded through manipulative guilt. Her inheritance is secure, guarded by a rigid legal trust that no opportunistic relative can ever breach. More importantly, her daily life is secure. She has a mother who will never view her as collateral damage. The math of my life finally balances perfectly. The toxic liabilities have been removed from the balance sheet. The assets that truly matter, peace of mind, a safe home, and the laughter of a child in the backyard are fully protected. I stepped down from the lanai and walked into the grass to join my daughter. The Hawaiian sun warmed my shoulders, and for the first time in my 34 years, I felt no heavy burden pressing down on my spine. If you are listening to this story right now, and you find yourself constantly cleaning up the wreckage left behind by people who refuse to take responsibility for their own lives, I want you to hear this very clearly. You do not owe them your peace. You do not owe them your financial security, and you certainly do not owe them your future. If you are standing in the shadows, holding a heavy tray for a family that only acknowledges you when they need something, it is time to let it go. Drop the tray. Step back and listen to the beautiful, liberating sound it makes when it finally hits the floor. The scars we carry from childhood rarely look like physical wounds. They look like perfectly balanced spreadsheets, a habit of over-apologizing for taking up space, and a reflexive need to fix everything that is broken in a room. When I sit on my lanai today, watching the Pacific Ocean breathe against the Hawaiian shoreline, I do not just see water. I see a mirror of the modern family dynamic. In our culture, we are relentlessly sold a specific image of the traditional family. We are presented with smiling holiday cards, unbreakable blood ties, and the overarching mandate that family comes first. But what happens when the people who share your DNA are the very ones holding your head underwater? The events that brought an 8-year-old girl named Mia into my life permanently taught me that true family responsibility sometimes requires burning your own family tree to the ground. My mother, Patricia, raised my sister Brittany and me under the toxic guise of keeping the peace. In many American households, keeping the peace is falsely equated with successful parenting. We are taught that a quiet house is a healthy house. But peace bought at the expense of a child's boundaries is just a hostage situation in disguise. Patricia's parenting lacked the foundational pillars of honesty and fairness. Instead of holding Brittany accountable for her misdeeds from childhood thefts to adult frauds, she outsourced the consequences to me. She weaponized my reliability. This is a catastrophic failure of emotional awareness in parenting. When a mother teaches one child that she is above the rules and teaches the other that her only value lies in absorbing the impact, she isn't raising a family. She is cultivating a predator and grooming her prey. Fairness is not about giving children equal portions of dessert. It is about holding them to an equal standard of character. By shielding Brittany from reality, Patricia effectively crippled her, turning her into a woman who would gladly abandon her own stepdaughter to steal an inheritance. Now, as the permanent guardian of Mia, I am confronted with the terrifying, beautiful privilege of shaping a child's long-term worldview. Raising a child in today's society requires a radical commitment to reality. Mia arrived on my porch clutching a backpack full of federal crimes, traumatized by a father and stepmother who viewed her as disposable collateral. To guide her through that trauma, I had to abandon the polite fictions that society expects us to uphold. Honester in parenting does not mean burdening a child with adult problems, but it does mean refusing to lie to them about the nature of the world. When Mia asked if I was mad at her for stealing the documents, the conventional, easy response would have been to shush her, to tell her everything was fine. Instead, I validated her reality. I told her she was brave. Emotional awareness in raising children means teaching them that their instincts are valid. It means showing them that trust is not an entitlement granted by biology. It is a currency earned through consistent, safe behavior. When children are raised in a transactional environment, they learn that love is a debt. Brittany learned to extract it. I learned to pay it. In a culture where success is so often measured by material acquisition and outward appearances, it is terrifyingly easy for parents to treat their children as extensions of their own egos, as investments that must yield a social return. Patricia traded my financial security for Brittany's illusion of wealth because to her, we were not daughters. We were columns on a balance sheet. To raise Mia differently, I have to rewrite that economic model of affection. I have to teach her that she does not owe me her compliance in exchange for her safety. She does not have to earn her right to be protected. Her worth is inherent, not calculated. There is an immense pressure in our society to forgive, to reconcile, to always leave a chair open at the table for toxic relatives because they are still your parents or she is still your sister. We are bombarded with narratives that suggest love can conquer generational dysfunction if we just try hard enough. But true family responsibility sometimes looks like unapologetic severance. Protecting a child means guarding their environment with the ferocity of a predator. How could I teach Mia about fairness, respect, and self-worth if I allowed the women who tried to destroy us to sit at our dinner table for the sake of appearances? You cannot plant a healthy garden in poisoned soil. My responsibility to Mia and to the future generation she represents was to show her what a non-negotiable boundary looks like. I had to model that walking away from abusers is not a failure of love. It is the highest expression of self-respect. These are the quiet, devastating truths we rarely discuss at the neighborhood block parties or parent-teacher meetings. We hide our dysfunctional ledgers behind closed doors, smiling through the exhaustion. But there is a profound strength in finally saying the quiet parts out loud, in connecting with others who have had to repossess their own lives from the people who were supposed to protect them. If you have ever had to break a generational curse, if you have ever chosen the hard truth over a comfortable lie, I invite you to join our community. Please subscribe and follow Zara Told Stories. Share your journey in the comments, and let us continue to build a space where quiet resilience is celebrated and the messy, authentic realities of chosen families are honored. When I look at the vast blue expanse of the ocean now, I think deeply about the legacy of parenting. We are told that our greatest duty as parents is to pass down our heritage, to keep the family line unbroken, to weave our children into the fabric of our ancestry. But I have come to believe something entirely different. The most profound act of parenting is not preservation. It is demolition. True love is having the courage to look at the burning, decaying structure of the family you were born into and deciding that the fire stops with you. It is standing in the ashes, looking at the child holding your hand, and refusing to hand them a bucket of water to save a house that was built to trap them. We are conditioned to believe that a broken family is a tragedy. But perhaps the real tragedy is an intact family held together by the crushing weight of a child's silenced suffering. Sometimes the most beautiful, enduring foundation you can offer a child is the empty space left behind when you finally walk away. Look closely at your own dinner table tonight. Who are you keeping a seat for? And more importantly, what is it costing the child sitting right next to you?